Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations. Welcome back, all of you lovely listeners. We have got another timeline episode leading us to the eventual release of Wind and Truth. I know that's what everyone is excited about, but this episode, we are looking at the numero uno, the main character of at least the first half of the Stormlight Archive, Kaladin Stormblessed. We're going to go through his history, his journey, some at a rapid pace. At some points, we're going to slow down and kind of take it easy. Maybe get the rest for ourselves that Kaladin truly deserves.
Yeah, this is sort of taking the place of a book reread series on the podcast. This time around, we are going to be going through our main characters and following just their storylines through all of the existing material up to this point. Hopefully this is a great way for you to catch up. Maybe you didn't have time to do a full reread, or let's be honest, maybe you started your reread 6 months ago because there's like 4,500 pages and you can't remember what you started all the way back then. That's fair enough. This is your refresher.
And before we get refreshed, how about a little housekeeping? An announcement is in the works, sending off fireworks, drum rolls, and big news banner now flashing.
We are panelists at Dragonsteel Nexus this year. So if you are going to be at Nexus, we really hope to see you there. We're very excited to be on a couple of panels this year. We will both be on the Saturday morning panel that is Cosmere 401, Advanced Cosmere Studies.
And Brooke will be starting off the convention on Thursday with the Stormlight summarizing and theorizing, a little recap of sorts to get everyone ready for the release event, which will be happening that Thursday. And then you can catch us Saturday morning as well on that second panel. Incredibly excited about Dragonsteel, and we're going to be there clearly. So please let us know if you are going to be at Dragonsteel this December. Do you want to now dive deep into a pit of despair where we will find our lonely bridgemen, always surrounded with friends, never actually together, the man apart from everyone else? Kaladin, let's go all the way back. A quick reminder, the first of the final 10 days, the first moment in Stormlight Book 5 will be in the year 1175, technically 5.1.1. That's just the way that the interactive map tracks Roshone time.
I think that is the 5th month, the first week, and the first day
yes.
of the week.
As far as I know, that is true. Month, week, day. 1175, though. That's where we're going to eventually get. Now, let's go back to the very beginnings of Kaladin's story.
He grows up in a little town called Hearthstone, and he kind of always feels out of place. His name is very different from his neighbors' names, and with his father being the surgeon, his family is in kind of this unique position. They are not necessarily on par with a lot of the other townspeople who are mostly farmers and tradesmen, but they're also not light-eyes. They're not wealthy. So Kaladin finds himself in this sort of middle space, never feeling like he quite fits in.
Geographically, Hearthstone is in northern Alethkar. It is fairly close to the border of Herdaz, not quite as close to Yakaved, where Shallan's family lives. That's going to be important because that is the land that belongs to Sadeas, and down the list from Sadeas, there is Amaram. Eventually, we get to Wistio, who is the lord over Kaladin's small town, who, of course, is going to be replaced eventually by Roshone. But before that, before Roshone shows up. Kaladin is already put into this position, partially by his father and the circumstances that his family is in, about training to be a surgeon. He begins his training at 8 or 9 years old under his father's tutelage, and that occurs in the year 1162. I think Lirin is a topic that many people would like to focus a bunch on and kind of like aim a lot of the blame for Kaladin's circumstance on Lirin. You had mentioned this, a growing hatred of Lirin
Yeah, there's a big Lirin hate group online.
Yeah, I wasn't quite aware, but I dove into those dark depths. Yeah. And they're angry. They're angry at Lirin.
I feel like it's just a group of people who don't like their own fathers, and they're just redirecting their father hate at Lirin.
That's fair. I think that's like 40 to 80% of all movies and TV shows is just, I'm angry at my dad, going all the way back to like Zeus angry at his dad, and then Hercules kind of angry at his dad. It's just angry dads all the way up and down. But Lirin does set Kaladin on this path, this dichotomy between the surgeon and the soldier.
I mean, Lirin really just sets him on the path to be a surgeon.
But he sets up this conflict in Kaladin's mind, presenting the opposite of what is highlighted by his society, which is soldiers and war, and the Alethi in general are even more so than everybody. But the peak of Kaladin's society that he is feeling from the outside is to join the war effort to eventually, help the religious aspects of their society gain victory in a spiritual war and a conquest. Like all of that is
You're talking about the sort of mythology in their religion that when you die, you will continue doing what you did in your life, but this time on the side of the angels, basically. And so if you are a warrior in life, you will fight the heavenly good battle with the angels.
Yeah. And so that's what Kaladin is kind of ingesting as a young person, and Lirin presents the opposite. And when Kaladin questions him originally about this, like all our stories are about heroes and warriors and the soldiers that fight bravely. Who ever tells a story about surgeons? And Lirin says, quote, "The children of the men and women whose lives we save. That's who tell stories of surgeons," end quote. He also says, quote, "There are two kinds of people in this world, son, those who save lives and those who take lives," end quote. With these two quotes, I see the best of Lirin and the hints of the worst of Lirin. His concept and the knowledge that he introduces Kaladin with of like, we can save, you can be a force for good that just helps people. That's lovely. Obviously, that's a great thing for a father to bestow onto a child. But then with the next quote, this very rigid, stubborn, almost arrogant concept of there's only two kinds of people in this world. You either save lives or you take lives. That's a harsh dichotomy to introduce to a child. It's also probably wrong. And like the fact that Lirin, seemingly in his own mind, divides the world this way is problematic, and I think leads to his personal problems. But just introducing that concept to Kaladin also sets up a long-term life battle within himself about these points.
Sure. Yeah, we should always be a little bit wary of black and white thinking. Most things are more complex than two kinds of people in this world. Just as a quick reminder, Kaladin's family consists of his father, Lirin, his mother, Hesina, and his younger brother, Tien. And they all gather in the square with all of the rest of the townspeople on the day that Roshone comes to Hearthstone. As you mentioned at the beginning, Roshone takes the place of their previous High Lord that sort of governs over the little town. He is a minor Light Eyes under Sadeas's house, and the way that he gets to Hearthstone is that he gains Elokar's trust. He convinces Elokar to falsely imprison some dark-eyed silversmiths. These are Moash's grandparents, and his goal is to benefit his friends, his silversmith friends.
Right.
He's basically taking out the competition so that his friends can prosper.
Good old-fashioned corruption.
Yeah. And Moash's grandparents end up dying in prison. Elokar wants to kill Roshone, but Dalinar convinces Elokar to just exile him instead. This is an instance of Dalinar trying to sort of modulate Elokar's ruling style, which is clearly very easily swayed. He convinces him to sort of take a more cautious, a more merciful approach and just exile Roshone. And they send him, quote, somewhere he can't do any more harm, end quote, which, as we know, doesn't really end up being the case. I don't know if that's justification for having killed him, but obviously the exile, still there are people who live in Hearthstone, so they are impacted.
Yeah, this kind of gets back to the issue that Kaladin will bring forward into the Stormlight Archive proper, his hatred of Light Eyes. And some of that is very justifiable in the way that Light Eyes treat those around them, as we'll talk about, like Amaram betraying Kaladin and his men. But there is this example as well, which is the neglect, the lack of foresight, the treating Dark Eyes and the people of Hearthstone as basically inconsequential. Dalinar treats them that way. Elokar, every one of these royal family Light Eyes probably treats hundreds or thousands of people like Roshone or below rank in this kind of just dismissive attitude. We can play a game with Roshone. He's not going to do anything bad. He's not going to get resentful or angry or upset because he'll just do what we say, the ruling class. And of course, even more dismissive of the people like Kaladin, Lirin, and those normal individuals who live in Hearthstone are just completely forgotten or ignored, barely acknowledged as like real human beings by Dalinar. And that type of attitude is almost more impactful to Kaladin's depression. Like, he doesn't have the hatred that Moash has. He has a little bit of that sadness of, how could I possibly change all of this? How could I possibly fix the way you thought of me and my family? When Dalinar says to him, we sent Roshone to a place that he couldn't do any more harm. What is more depressing to Kaladin than that? He's like, oh, I know what happened in that situation, but you don't. You just think of this as all as some type of weird power play. And you had Elokar get that nice moment where he didn't murder someone. Instead, you just force them out. And we're going to have a lot more of these types of moments with Kaladin. He has a really dark series of events that bring him lower and lower and lower as his journey goes on.
But we haven't even gotten there yet. We're still in Kaladin's childhood. When Roshone comes to Hearthstone, he basically immediately takes a dislike to Kaladin's family. He accuses Lirin of killing Wistio and of stealing the spheres that Wistio had gifted to them.
And just to give a timeline, this is 1166 when Roshone shows up in Hearthstone. So Kaladin right around 13 years old at this point. It's in this moment that Kaladin's witnessing the interactions between his father, their family, and Roshone, and the growing distrust that will eventually kind of tear their family apart. But you also see moments where Lirin is confronting the townspeople as his family's starving and like nobody is giving them food or paying him for his services. But he has that moment when he like stands up to all of the individuals and is like, who fixed your arm? Who saved your kid when they were sick? And so Kaladin is getting these examples from Lirin of truly being honorable and also making very bad decisions. While we don't think that Lirin has any part in the death of Wistio, he's definitely committing fraud, stealing things that don't belong to him, and giving Kaladin a contradiction, a man who is seemingly so brave in one moment, seemingly so cowardly in another. And it's kind of that contradiction and that conflict that Kaladin wants to solve by being a soldier, by just moving down a path that he kind of knows and understands. But he bounces back and forth during his young life, during his teenage years, between these different examples that his father presents. I want to get some listener feedback on this question between Lirin and Kaladin and all of these contradictions that Lirin kind of originally establishes and Kaladin deals with for most of his character arc. Listener, what do you think about Lirin's philosophy on life? The things that he tries to impart upon Kaladin, do you think these are valuable, or do you think they're an example of Lirin's arrogance and hard-headedness and maybe passing on incorrect knowledge to his son? How do you come out on this question?
Yeah, he's actually decided that he's going to be a surgeon. His father has convinced him. He decides that he doesn't want to go into the army. He's going to be a surgeon. He's going to kind of honor all of the sacrifices that his parents have made for him. And that's just when Amaram comes to Hearthstone. Amaram comes recruiting for the army, and Roshone basically makes him draft Tien, Kaladin's younger brother. And so in order to protect his brother, Kaladin volunteers as well, and his hopes of going to study to become a surgeon are abandoned by the wayside.
Jumping forward just a couple of years, Tien obviously dies in battle, kind of thrown away, dismissed in the same way by his squad leaders as Dalinar was dismissive of the people of Hearthstone. It was just, these are cannon fodder. They didn't have cannons, but these were army fodder, and the kids just kind of thrown in the front.
But we also hear from Tien in Rhythm of War that it was at least somewhat his choice, that he volunteered to be in the point position because it made it easier for the rest of his squad, basically. So yes, obviously he was put in a terrible position, but he did have agency, and he did make choices even in that moment.
I think that's important, and it's definitely a lesson learned in Rhythm of War with Maya as well, and all of the Spren, but Kaladin and Tien's relationship specifically, and how Kaladin will also choose his actions, even though his circumstance is awful and difficult and traumatic, but it is also still his choice to move forward. And I think that's a beautiful moment that we learn about Tien. He wasn't only a victim. He is a victim. And I will not back to, you don't put little kids who are at this point like 14, 15 years old in your front lines. Like, that's not good military practice in general. But in that difficult moment, in that difficult situation, Tien still has a choice. And so does Kaladin, and so do all of the Spren, and so do all of our characters.
After Tien's death, Kaladin takes on a leadership role in the army, and he is specifically trying to protect people who are easily overlooked or abused like Tien was.
This is 1169, Tien's death, 1170, as Kaladin becomes a leader. We also hear this later from Syl, quote, "They would have died more quickly without you. You made it so that they had a family in the army. I remember their gratitude. It's what drew me in the first place. You helped them," end quote. Giving us maybe the first and earliest confirmation about when Syl was looking for Kaladin. Not that they met, not that he knew anything about Syl, but seemingly this is early when he suffers the loss of Tien, but still commits himself to helping others, to helping kids like Tien, and to building that group with his first squad.
Yeah. With that kind of tight-knit group that he has built, his company in a battle attacks and eventually kills a shardbearer who is trying to kill Amaram. We later discover that this shardbearer is Helleran, Shallan's oldest brother, and he is working with the Skybreakers against the Sons of Honor, of which Amaram is a part.
Of course, Amaram's betrayal ends in the death of the surviving members of his squad. Kaladin is branded a slave and sold into slavery as a kindness, in heavy quotes, by Amaram, and we will kind of pick up with him as he has moved through multiple forms of slavery and eventually is like on his way to the Shattered Plains.
Yes, and Amaram takes that shard blade for himself, takes the shards for himself. Kaladin as a slave officially meets Syl, and once they reach the Shattered Plains, he is sold to Sadeas as a bridgeman. Of course, he goes through his Bridge 4 journey and creates the crew as we know it. During this time, he becomes a surge binder. He starts experimenting with his powers, And of course, big battle, Bridge 4 saves Dalinar and the rest of Dalinar's army at the Battle of the Tower in 1173.
Yeah, 1173 puts him right around 19, 20 years old. It is during that Battle of the Tower that Kaladin swears the second ideal: I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. And this is the coming out party for his role as Windrunner and as one of the leaders of the refounded Knights Radiant.
At least as far as Bridge 4 is concerned. He's not out publicly as a Radiant.
Right, but I do think that this swearing of the ideal is the point where he can no longer choose any other path. Like, he's eventually going to come out publicly because he's out to Bridge 4.
Well, with what happens in Words of Radiance, we'll see that this is not the only path he could have.
Very true. But the one that he is going to go down will lead him to joining Dalinar's honor guard and expanding the original core bridgemen to be more of a protective unit, as well as training many of the other soldiers and guards. And so this leadership approach is, again, putting him in the circumstance where he will make the decisions over and over that I think will lead him to becoming the eventual Kaladin that we see.
Yeah, he's made a captain, which is very unusual for a Dark Eyes and kind of symbolizes Dalinar's trust and faith in him. Kaladin, after a lot of badgering from Syl, finally tells Dalinar about his experience with Amaram, and Dalinar says that he'll look into it. It's during this time as well that Kaladin fights Szeth for the first time and kind of learns what is fully possible with surge binding by watching all of the things that Szeth can do. And this kind of ignites that desire in Kaladin to continue learning and training with these powers.
Yeah, training his powers with members of Bridge 4, but also training in general with Zahel, the Sword Master.
Yeah.
And I think throughout Words of Radiance, we see kind of escalating aspects of Kaladin's persona and kind of the most simplistic version of, I'm a hero, this is great, I have new powers, is kind of eliminated in favor of the dichotomy that we talked about originally, but now playing itself out on how can I protect bad people, bad kings, how can I protect my friends and the Parshendi themselves. At this time, he's questioning Syl as well as people all around him. You know, if across from me are the Parshendi and they're acting honorably, why am I not protecting them? Why is it always the lowliest among society that are forced to fight and die? And all of this contradictions that he is dealing with build around the Moash question. The eventual in-plot point of Words of Radiance is going to kind of surround this assassination attempt by Moash. It needs to be said, a huge moment for Kaladin is the disadvantaged duel with Adolin.
Of course, one of the most iconic moments in the Stormlight Archive, Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do. It's this battle that wins Kaladin shards, Shard Plate and Shard Blade. He gives these treasures to Moash after spending a brief stint in jail, and Moash clues him in to a plot that he is a part of to assassinate King Elokar. At first, Kaladin is really resistant to the idea, but after he learns that Elokar is responsible for sending Roshone to Hearthstone, he comes to agree with Moash that getting rid of Elokar would just be the best thing for the country.
Despite the contradiction that will eventually cause him to lose his powers, he is still trying to practice and gain new skills. He kind of recognizes that there has to be more out there for him, but he is resistant because the situation around him is telling him to stay hidden, to not come out to Dalinar, to not face Amaram or Elhokar to not help Adolin in that disadvantaged duel. He has this kind of like weariness to him that he's always been carrying, and that weariness is his form of resistance, his anchor to overcome, but it's always present in these moments.
Eventually, because of this contradiction between Kaladin's oaths to protect and his oaths to be a guard for Dalinar and Elhokar versus his agreement to Moash that he will help in this plot to kill the king, Syl leaves Kaladin. And she almost dies because Kaladin's oaths are so close to being broken. He's agreed to either help kill the king or at the very least, not oppose an assassination attempt. And his duty is as a guard to protect the king. Obviously, he can't do both of those things at once. And that is the conundrum that he finds himself in without Syl and bereft of his newfound powers.
Elhokar definitely is the definition of a person who cannot protect themselves, and Kaladin just swore an ideal to protect that type of individual. As he is weakened without powers, he and Shallan fall into the chasm during the exploration out into the plains. This is going to be another transformational moment for Kaladin as he recognizes in Shallan something that he thought only existed within himself.
Yeah.
And very much on
He's
point.
Like, I'm the only one who's ever been hurt.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of Lirin coming through there, that arrogance to think that your mind or what you are dealing with and how you process things is the only way that a person can legitimately experience pain.
Yeah.
And that's what Shallan breaks him of in a moment that always sticks with me. Do you want to read this quote?
Quote, he saw it in her eyes, the anguish, the frustration, the terrible nothing that clawed inside and sought to smother her. She knew it was there inside. She had been broken. Then she smiled. Oh, Storm. She smiled anyway. It was the single most beautiful thing he'd seen in his entire life. End quote.
Kaladin and Shallan make their way back through the chasms, relying on Shallan's drafting ability, less so on Kaladin's soldiering skills. And eventually they are able to protect themselves from the flood waters, survive the high storm, and then emerge once again, confirming or reconfirming the storm-blessed nature of Kaladin. And yet he himself was not the hero in this instance. It was, frankly, mostly Shallan or all Shallan.
He does kill a chasm fiend, like basically powerless. So I think this is an example of Kaladin's
battle skills.
Yeah, even without his surge binding, he's clearly a really superior spear wielder and fighter. When they get back to camp, Moash tells Kaladin that the assassination is going to happen soon. At this point, Dalinar and the rest of the army are out on the plains doing their sort of final push, final expedition to combat the Parshendi. So they're basically alone in the war camp. And one rainy night, Elhokar comes to visit Kaladin and kind of begs for his help to learn how to be a better person. He says that he tries so hard, and yet somehow he always seems to do the wrong thing, and all he wants is to be a better man. And Kaladin turns him away and says, I can't help you. But later he has this realization.
Quote, it hadn't been Tien's fault. Tien had tried. He'd still failed, so they'd killed him. Kaladin fell to his knees in the water. Almighty, oh almighty, the king was Dalinar's Tien. End quote. That link from Tien to Elhokar and the recognition that Tien trying, though pointless or though not going to change his circumstance, is exactly what Elhokar is trying to do now. And Elhokar still has the potential to change his circumstance.
Yeah, the idea of trying, that it's not necessarily the outcome, but the fact that someone is trying to be a good person, that is important. I think this is such a keystone moment for the series that it's not just the people who are perfectly honorable who are worthy, but sometimes it's the people who are trying really hard and failing over and over and over and over again, but they keep trying. With this realization, Kaladin rescues the king from the assassination attempt and even goes so far that he is willing to give his life to do the right thing. He's still no powers at this point, and he is fighting injured and beaten down. It's a bad moment, but he's willing to do what he needs to do. And this is what redeems him in the eyes of Syl, who then returns at the last moment and is with him as he swears his third ideal: I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right.
Just important to call out the distinction because time's moving much faster now. We had started jumping years. The difference between his second ideal, the Battle of the Tower, and his third ideal, the saving of the king, is only one single month. I know the months work a little different on Roshar. So let's break that down really quickly just so everyone's on the same page, because on Roshar, and when we're speaking about different lengths of time, we're talking about the Rosharan calendar. There are 10 months during a year, and each month is 50 days. The weeks are broken down 5 days per week, so 50 days or 10 total weeks makes up a single month. And so when we are talking about this gap in time between second ideal and third ideal, we are talking about 50 days-ish, right around there. And it might be best to think of this as day-night cycles. So for characters experiencing a day-night cycle, even though on this planet the lengths of those things are different, Kaladin spends 50 days from second ideal to third ideal.
This is a lot to happen to a person in 1 month, to say nothing of the last 5 years of Kaladin's life.
Yeah, I mean, war moves fast, but this is definitely moving real fast.
When I laid out Kaladin's whole story like this, I think the enormity and the intensity of these events that are happening back to back for him really starts to become super clear. And I think it makes his depression a little bit more understandable. Honestly, it's shocking that he is as functional as he is with all of the things that he is going through. But with his third ideal, he is able to manifest Syl as a shard blade, and she is a living shard blade, so she can transform into any shape. With this new power and new confidence in himself and his ideals, Kaladin flies to the Shattered Plains and saves Dalinar from Szeth. He pursues Szeth through the storm and he kills him. Then Kaladin is ready to reveal himself publicly and to own his identity as a knight radiant.
That brings us to the end of book 2 and kind of the start of Oathbringer, where I think everyone will acknowledge that Kaladin does begin to play a little bit more of a supporting role rather than one of the primary characters, though we still get plenty of chapters from his perspective. The time he has as a Knight Radiant out publicly is basically immediately undercut by the cataclysm of the Everstorm and the high storms colliding, the rush of people to get to Urithiru, and the transition of the listeners, the Parshmen, into the Void Bringers, in quotes, because we find out more complexities there in a little bit. But all of that immediately sends Kaladin into a desire to protect his family and to return to Hearthstone for the first time since he and Tien left.
In Hearthstone, once again, he's reunited with his family. He gets a little bit of closure for some of those childhood stories that he told himself about who he was and what his place in the world was by seeing his home again and just facing his neighbors and the townspeople as a new person. He also meets a new person, his baby brother, Oradin.
Yeah. Oradin is just about a year old, maybe a little younger or a little older than a year at this point in time. So it was several years that Lirin and Hasina did not have any children, and that time we don't have a whole bunch of knowledge about. But I think it was really difficult on both of them. The willingness to have another child is one of the great things about people in general, like suffering, difficulty, and loss, and still making the decision and the commitment
to bring new life in. And like it's such an expression of hope.
Yes. And I think that's why seeing his little brother is the thing that finally breaks him in a certain way that allows him to heal. Like he needs to kind of cry with his family.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of a balm to him to see this expression of hope and to see that new life can spring up where there once was death.
Recognizing that his family was not killed or destroyed by the Everstorm, he has to carry on his mission, which is to discover the movements of we know them as listeners. They're calling them the Void Bringers at this point. But he gets in with a group of Parshmen that had been around his town. So they were not the warriors, but they all were kind of versions of his friends and the family members that he just saw in Hearthstone.
Well, they were their slaves, but
so they are the
they
slaves.
were not the Parshendi like warriors on the plains. They're just the sort of regular Parshmen.
And it's while with this group that Kaladin has the bigger realization that he and the people of Hearthstone have a lot more in common with these Parshmen than many of the Light Eyes or certainly the people that he's rolling around with now as casual friends like Dalinar Kholin.
Yeah, and Kaladin is originally taken captive by this group. They like discover him and make him a captive. But once he sees that these are just regular people with families trying not to be slaves, he wants to help them. And so he teaches them various survival skills, and he feels this really deep empathy with them because of his time as a slave and a bridgeman. He travels with them and then eventually breaks away and flies back to Urithiru. When he arrives back at Urithiru, Elokar asks him to join the expedition that they're preparing to go to Kholinar. That city has been out of contact with them for a while. They're not sure what's going on, and they're putting together like a strike team to investigate. And Elokar loves Kaladin. I know Kaladin doesn't love Elokar, but I think it's really cute how much Elokar admires Kaladin and is like, I need you to be on my team. Part of this is because Elokar thinks that he's going to fail, and he knows that Kaladin will succeed. And so part of this invitation is like, I need you to come because I need you to finish the mission when I fail.
Horrific, because we know what is going to happen on that mission. And before we get there and cry once again, it's important to remember that simultaneously, Kaladin is taking on more and more responsibilities as a general and leader of the Windrunners, which are in a complex political position because of the nature and the history. And so he's trying to recruit Windrunner squires. He's still bound to Dalinar and kind of owes his life to Dalinar, but also has bigger responsibilities to a growing group of people. It's at this time that he begins having conversations with Sigzil about how are families going to join Bridge 4. Some of the Bridgemen have families and had them prior to being a Bridgeman, and then others are creating new family and finding new loves and all that jazz. Kaladin does participate in some of those things, but it is reluctantly kind of being dragged along with the group.
The problem with gaining status and power is that most of the time that means you have to do a lot more administrative work. And I don't know that that's Kaladin's strength. He's more of a stabby, flyy kind of guy. So it's a good thing that he has friends like Sigzil to help him do the admin of the army. Kaladin is also still working on his own powers and still learning and discovering the different things that he can do. And part of this is learning how to fly large groups of people with him by flying above high storms for the constant infusion of stormlight and like lashing the guests with him as he flies. This is how they get to Kholinar in their little strike team. And they discover that Kholinar is under human control. It has not been taken over by the Voidbringers, seemingly, but it still looks kind of suspicious. So they decide not to fly in all fancy-like, but to sneak in covertly.
The best way that they can stay under the radar is to infiltrate the wall guard. And it's here that Kaladin is going to meet High Marshal Azure,
aka Vivenna.
Her of noted sword that we can't spend too much time speculating on today because this is all about Kaladin. But we get the great moment when Kaladin's returning with some new wall guard friends, and Adolin's like, Stormin Bridge boy, he's probably been made their leader already.
Yeah. Eventually, Kaladin earns Azure's trust, and he confesses to her that he's been sent by the king. Azure then reveals that there is a secret room lined with aluminum where the soul casters are being kept, and Azure agrees to join their assault on the palace, providing some troops.
And the meeting of Azure and Kaladin is noted on the timeline as 1174, 1.10.5.
During the assault on the palace, Kaladin is responsible for saving Azadan and Gavinor, so Elokar's family, his wife and his son. Kaladin and Elokar find the queen, but she's been possessed by Yelignar, so they're like, all right, peace out, B. They are able to save Gavinor. As they are attempting to leave the palace, there's a full-scale battle underway. The wall guard is fighting the Parshmen, and Kaladin recognizes a group of Parshmen from the escaped slaves that he had traveled with. He becomes overwhelmed by these conflicting loyalties and tries to stop all of his friends from fighting each other.
Elokar is in the process of saying the first ideal to a cryptic, but is killed by Moash before he is able to do so, ending Elokar's reign and breaking Kaladin in a different way, a new way than he was broken in the last book. That was an internal conflict with himself, and now he is facing this external reality that all of his friends, be they humans or TNs in the form of Elokar or the Parshmen that he has met, are fighting and dying, and he cannot stop it.
Yeah, I think if we want to kind of go back to Kaladin's formation with Lirin and the kind of black and white thinking that he grows up with, this is the moment when that completely ceases to be. Throughout all of these ideals that he's been swearing and this journey that he's been on, he's learning that it's not black and white, right? That Elokar isn't just a bad guy, that the Parshmen are not just Voidbringers, that this division of us versus them is not quite that neat and clean and black and white. And that is hard. That is really hard. And that complexity, that sort of deep experience breaks Kaladin, as you said, in a way that he has not been broken before. He goes deeply into shock. He's paralyzed with grief and trauma, and Adolin and the others like literally have to drag him out of the palace as they escape via the Oath Gate and are deposited into Shadesmar.
And Kholinar falls temporarily. We're still dealing with the ramifications of that loss. Now in Shadesmar, the group is going to need to escape to another Oath Gate, and they move. For the first time, we see Shadesmar kind of on display or in the flesh, so to speak. So it's a great bit of Shadesmar knowledge, but Kaladin himself is not necessarily
into it.
Yeah, the leader of this. This is more Shallan and Adolin's time in the book, and they kind of take center stage because he is deeply wounded mentally and spiritually. And during their travels in Shadesmar, they do come across a lighthouse with a mysterious painting inside of it.
In the lighthouse, Kaladin touches a glass globe and he sees a vision of Dalinar with 9 shadows, and then he also sees Thalen's city. After that, the group charters a boat to Celebrant. Celebrant is under fused control, so enemy control, and our hero group is able to narrowly escape by boarding a ship run by Honor Spren. They're able to do that only because Syl gives herself up to them, and the Honor Spren imprison Syl because she ran away to bond a human, and the Honor Spren are not big fans. So she gets imprisoned. This is very upsetting to Kaladin, who is, again, already super depressed at this point. But he is able to make a connection with the captain of the ship, the Honor Spren Naughtum, who will come back a little bit later and hang out with Adolin. But this is not Adolin's story. Naughtum and Kaladin have a pretty positive relationship when the Honor Spren see that Kaladin is getting close to the 4th ideal. And Kaladin tells them that Dalinar has bonded the Stormfather, and this gives them at least a little bit of a better view of these budding Knights Radiant. Gives them a little bit more cred.
Yeah, this confirmation regarding the bonding of the Stormfather is also part of the deep mystery here. The Stormfather is something more than just a Spren at this point in time, and Dalinar bonding the Stormfather does more than it would have in the past. We don't know all of those ramifications or how it will affect the Stormfather. For example, if Dalinar breaks his bonds in Stormlight Archive 5.
Don't say that.
I'm just saying there's a lot of things going on. But in this moment, simply the acknowledgement that Honor's cognitive shadow, which is imparted into the Stormfather, has bonded Dalinar, is enough to put that kernel in Naughtum's mind that the Knights Radiant, the Windrunners, are perhaps on the path of righteousness. Because we know eventually that Naughtum will be one of those big believers in Honor is not dead as long as he lives in the hearts of men.
Harried by the Fused, the group finally makes it to the Thalen Oath Gate, only to find that the gate itself is being guarded by Fused. There is a really difficult and kind of harrowing fight that occurs. Syl is encouraging Kaladin to say the 4th ideal so that he can power up during this fight, but he is not in a place to be making more oaths and like making himself more vulnerable.
And while we're going to get there eventually, I just want to remind everyone what the words he will eventually say, but he cannot in this moment, which are, quote, "I accept that there will be those I cannot protect." That's his 4th ideal. So at this moment, that's the thing he cannot accept. He, in his mind, should be able to protect everyone, including all of those that he just lost in Kholinar.
Ultimately, the group is brought into the physical realm by Dalinar opening Honor's perpendicularity for the first time, and they are spit out right into the raging battle of Thalen Field. During this battle, Kaladin defends Dalinar from both Amaram and the Fused, so he's spit back out into another really difficult and harrowing battle. After a long fight as Amaram continuously gains surge-binding powers due to Yelignar's influence, Rock eventually kills Amaram with an arrow to the head.
And perhaps a magically inspired arrow. We still haven't gotten answers about that one.
Because he uses a shard bow, right?
He does, yes, use a shard bow. And as far as we know, Windrunner abilities do not enhance strength. It's not as if Kaladin is a great fighter because he's super strong.
I will say, on my reread, I've noticed a few weird things that Rock says about like him having special powers or
certainly
being special in some way.
I'm hoping.
So it could be that Rock has other powers and it's not a Night Radiant thing, but it could be a Night Radiant thing.
Yeah, we have talked a little bit about the bonds and the lesser bonds, the Nahel bond and the Luhel bond. We also know that there are bonds that Spren have with animals on Roshar. The music Spren with the Rayshadium, the sky eels, and a couple of the other flying animals.
And horn eaters are the descendants of humans and singers mating.
Yeah, so there is still a lot of speculation that while Rock may not have a Windrunner Spren bond, there may be some bonding of lesser Spren that Horn Eaters are temporarily able to do, or that Rock, because of his position and his belief structure, allow him to, temporarily do something that may be considered a lesser bond. I'm so sorry. We've fallen down.
Yeah, a rock rabbit hole.
Let's claw ourselves back up to Kaladin on Thalen Fields.
There's not too much else in this plot line. After the battle, Kaladin is able to find the members of Bridge 4 that he left in Kholinar, and they've got Gavinor. He's safe. They're safe. Everything. Okay, maybe not everything, but some things are great. The baby is alive. We love to see it.
That sets up Rhythm of War. Let's focus in and really nail down this timeline, because Rhythm of War, I would say, is not Kaladin focused, but he still does get a bunch of time in the tower that are important to kind of call out his key moments. Beginning with his promotion to High Marshal, he's dealing with kind of the same thing, but now on an even grander level. He was getting too busy with Bridge 4 and the roles that were changing in the army. Now he's basically in charge of everything, and he is going to appoint characters like Lopin, Huio, and Cord to investigate the Oathgate of Akina, which is the short story Dawn Shard. So they go off and have an adventure that is technically in between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, or while Rhythm of War is getting started.
Yeah. During this time, Kaladin has a short romantic relationship. Finally, we know.
Only the second one that we've heard about. He had one when he was younger, and then this relationship with Lyn are the two relationships we know that he's had.
There is another relationship that he references from his time as a slave. He talks about
That's right. A woman he escaped with.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
We don't really know anything about her, but it was definitely a romantic relationship. So there's been at least 3. The one that happens at this time is with Lyn, who used to be a Kholin army scout, and now she has turned into a Windrunner, but she breaks up with him, which obviously is great for Kaladin's depression.
It's not great. It's never been great. Everything is terrible.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Kaladin travels back to Hearthstone. He is there on a mission to extract a Herdasian general and to evacuate his family and the rest of the town, because the town is being taken over by Fused and Singers. He fights a bunch of Fused. He meets Leshwi for the first time, and he also battles Lezian the Pursuer for the first time in Hearthstone. Side note, our crew has airships now. Yeah. Big ol' flying platforms.
In a history of Roshar, flight is definitely going to exist as a key marker. Kaladin going to Hearthstone again is probably not on
one of those things is important.
It's not one of the lines on the timeline, but I guarantee the moment that someone figures out flight on any planet is going to be a huge moment in their history. And so for us, we can say Kaladin personally is returning to Hearthstone at the moment that Navani and her Artifabrians figure out the airship abilities.
There are some civilians that are trapped in the town, and Kaladin goes to save them. And then he encounters Lezian again. This is basically the subtitle of Rhythm of War. Rhythm of War. Kaladin encounters Lezian again.
Each time with new abilities.
Boring. But this time, Lezian has a device that inhibits radiant powers. But as we know, Kaladin is still a really skilled warrior without his radiant abilities, and he does really well during this fight. But in a moment when he is not looking, Moash slips in and slits Roshone's throat. And he and Kaladin have this confrontation where they disagree about whether Roshone and Elokar deserve death. And Moash basically tells Kaladin to kill himself, and the violence and vitriol of that exchange paralyzes Kaladin.
Moash says this, quote, "But I won't fight you, Cal," Moash whispered. "There's no fight to be won. We lost the moment we were born into this cursed life of suffering. The sole victory left to us is to choose to end it. I found my way. There is one open to you," end quote. Suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation is definitely something that Kaladin has dealt with before and struggled with before. It is stepping away from the honor chasm in the first book that marks Kaladin's decision to be different, to go forth on a new path. And Moash is returning him to those circumstances.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what happened the last time he was in Hearthstone, when he meets his baby brother and sees this symbol of hope and a beacon to continue on. This time when he comes back, he gets this message of despair, that there is no point in continuing on and that he should just give up.
Right. It's almost a secondary wound, because any moment of realization, any moment of happiness only leads you to a decline. And what Moash is saying is you'll always come back to this point of wanting to kill yourself or being left with this decision. Doesn't matter how many little baby brothers you have and how cute they are. He is saying, and we don't believe this, but Moash is presenting this idea that no matter what good you might squeeze out of this existence, it's always going to lead you back to this path.
I think it's more about choice. As we were talking about earlier, like, we can't control our circumstances, but we can control the choices that we make in those circumstances. And Moash is basically saying our circumstances is that we were born dark eyes and there's nothing we can do about it. We have no choice, which I think is wrong. Fortunately, at this point, Renarin comes in and displays, kind of projects a vision of the person Moash could have become. A Windrunner protecting people, like the best version of Moash. And Moash is so shocked and I think feels so guilty about like not living up to this best version of himself that he runs away.
I'm also wondering, because I'm ever so curious about Truth Watchers, if there is not only vision, but also a feeling that Renarin, as we have talked about, is kind of a game breaker and exists outside of Odium's, Taravangian's direct view in the diagram. And I wonder if when Renarin gives this sight, this vision to Moash, if there isn't also a blocking of whatever Odium is doing, and basically emotion and feeling come rushing back in with Moash. And that's kind of what overwhelms him in that moment.
Maybe. That's not in the text, but that could be your headcanon.
Yeah, fun speculation for my Truth Watchers. I am very curious about like the illusions and how Shallan gives weight to them. Renarin theoretically gives weight to them, but that not just being physical present, it also kind of being like...
Yeah, like can they communicate an emotion with their projections?
Exactly. Like how far can you push this skill?
I mean, they only have control over waveforms. As far as we know on Earth, I don't think emotion is a waveform, but who knows? And who knows how things work on Roshar? At this point, understandably, Kaladin's depression is pretty severe. He seeks some guidance from Zahel, and Zahel gives him a lecture about realmatic theory.
Just a man after my own heart.
Yeah. Kaladin then decides to retire from active duty in the military and decides to help his father as a surgeon, kind of go back to his roots, return to this trade that is only about helping and not killing.
And not only does he help people physically, but it's in this time that he will begin to focus on mental health struggles. And boy, is Roshar in need of some therapists and people who recognize not just severe battle fatigue or battle shock, but also the variety of different mental illnesses, mental maladies, not magical in this instance, but how that impacts so many of their world and how they were basically just forgotten.
Yeah, and Kaladin kind of takes this on. He starts becoming really passionate about helping these people and providing treatments that he's found helpful and kind of using his own experience with mental illness to help others that he recognizes as having similar symptoms. Unfortunately, Kaladin's journey to become Rashar's first mental health professional is interrupted when the tower is taken over by the Fused. Kaladin and Lift are the only Radiants that are not in a coma. For Kaladin, it's because he was so close to the fourth ideal. During this time, though, his lashings do not work and his healing is very slow.
Yeah, so this block, this resistance fabrial that the Fused have is certainly powerful, but can also be overridden. Like the greater power of a Radiant Bond is superior in potential than whatever device this is.
The device is the tower. It has like a repelling
that's turned
function
on,
that the Fused flip so that instead of repelling void light or void binding, it repels the Nahel bond or like surge binding.
And Kaladin is over to, and we believe any fourth ideal Night Radiant would be able to overwhelm those. Lift is just weird. And we're going to leave.
Because she's weird.
Exactly.
She gets to do whatever she wants.
All of this is happening in 1175 in the fourth month of that year. 1175 is our final year. So there's no more year changes here. We are all downhill from this moment on.
Kaladin kind of throws away his identity as a surgeon, yet again becoming a combatant in order to protect a comatose Teft from the Fused. And he goes into hiding. Fortunately, he is able to communicate with Navani during this time via the tower / the sibling. And he kind of acts as a secret agent since he's the only one that can move around and like do stuff. And he does various missions to try to help everyone in the tower and undermine the occupation. At many points, he fights Lezian, the pursuer, blah, blah, blah.
And he is fighting and resisting, doing the secret agent stuff with the benefit of adhesion. While his gravitation surge is blocked, his healing is limited, his access to the surge of adhesion is not impacted, though he is not as practiced with this surge. And so
yeah, it's not the one that helps him fly, so it's less useful in some ways.
In some ways, but I think as we speculate more and more and wonder about the abilities of Dalinar as well as Kaladin and how they use adhesion, this is just the first example of Honor's truest surge on display.
During this time, Kaladin is also frequently suffering from nightmares, and eventually Kaladin's consciousness gets trapped on Braze by Odium. It's there that he meets Hoyd once again, and Hoyd gives Kaladin a short reprieve from the torture of being on Braze and being in nightmares while telling him a cute story of a dog and a dragon.
I think it's important to remember that these nightmares are not only Kaladin derived. These are Odium sent nightmares.
Yes.
And it is kind of the 1-2 combo. Moash went out and introduced the idea of suicide back into Kaladin's life. And then Odium is hammering him from the cognitive realm. And I think we have to imagine that this is one of the myriad of ways that Odium has been able to torture the Heralds for so many desolations and so much time, is that to give a reprieve, to give a break, and then to have to go back into the difficulty is a nightmare all unto its own. You know what is out there waiting, and then you are kind of unable to control even your own mind.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I don't think the Herald's got a reprieve.
Oh, I imagine that the reprieve is just less pain, and they definitely have those moments.
I think the reprieve is going to Roshar to fight the desolation.
Yeah, that's the good time for them.
Yeah.
Because
it's like go into battle.
Once you are fully on Braze, you are in the grasp of Odium completely, and he can just toy
I mean, I think
with
it's also
whoever he
more
wants.
than odium. I think that they're like literally
course.
the Voidbringers are on Braze physically torturing the Heralds. Like maybe there's a mental component too, but I'm pretty sure there's physical torture.
I think the physical torture is something that maybe the Heralds were prepared for and were willing to have that be part of the sacrifice. But there's a very different aspect when your mind is not in your control. And I think that is something that from Oathbringer, we heard from the Parchment is just like the worst thing about it was I was sitting there trapped in my own mind, looking out, unable to stop this wrong, to help my family, to do anything. And yeah, I just imagine that Kaladin is getting a little dose right now of what the Heralds were dealing with for thousands of years.
Eventually, Lift is brought in to heal Kaladin, and he goes off to fight the Pursuer yet again. After finding that Teft has been killed by Vyre, aka Moash, Kaladin kills Lezian in a super graphic, gross, intense way that is very uncharacteristic for Kaladin.
Notably in this moment, his eyes glow yellow instead of the normal blue of Stormlight.
Yes. And another fused takes Lirin to the top of the tower. Kaladin races to the top of the tower in an attempt to save Lirin, but Lirin gets dropped off of the tower, and then in complete despair at this point, Kaladin also throws himself off the tower and decides to die. The Stormfather, at Dalinar's urging, kind of tries to talk him out of it, but it doesn't work. Dalinar refuses to give up, though, and he sends Kaladin a vision. He uses capital C connection to send Kaladin this vision of Tien. Maybe more than a vision. There might be some connection to the spiritual realm happening here. The brothers are able to talk in this space, and Tien helps Kaladin make peace with Tien's death. Kaladin then feels strong enough to continue living and to declare his fourth ideal: I accept that there will be those I cannot protect.
In this moment, Windspren surround Kaladin and crystallize into his shard plate. We get the first example of a unique shard plate ability as Kaladin sends his shard plate to save Lirin, to like catch him in his fall. Kaladin, as a fourth ideal, Night Radiant, now not restricted in any way. So he is back to full force, rescues Lirin, returns him to the tower, and
they win, basically. They overcome the occupation. After this entire ordeal, Kaladin recommits to his interest in mental health, and he even agrees to participate in the group therapy, not just run it. I think it's worth noting that at the end of Rhythm of War, Kaladin is also reunited with both Hoid's flute and Tien's wooden horse, both items that were left long ago.
Yeah, Tien's wooden horse, even far longer, like pre his time as a slave. And
I think so.
Wooden flute lost it sometime in the movement at the end of Words of Radiance, when the camps were
I think it
evacuated.
Gets left in his barracks at Sadius's camp.
Right. And so there's no explanation that we have for these two things right now, but I do think that it comes back to the moment with Dalinar, capital C connection, and an aspect of adhesion that we currently do not understand.
That's an interesting take.
Well, let's go on to the speculation. We are obviously done. Kaladin is now caught up.
Yep.
Stormlight Archive 5 begins with Kaladin in this mindset, fourth ideal.
Go into
Radiant.
group therapy.
Go into group therapy.
I love
What
it.
could be better?
Yeah.
Let's speculate.
There is a quote that I think maybe gives us some hints as to what Kaladin's role will be in the future of the Stormlight Archive. Syl says, quote, I feel like there is a lot to explore with our powers, Kaladin. Things that in the past, maybe they didn't have the time or resources to think about because they were always fighting, end quote. I would love to see Kaladin kind of be at the forefront of this power exploration and discovering a new level of what is possible with the Nahel bond.
Completely agree. I think that is the happy ending for Kaladin that many people are imagining. Syl's quote here reminds me of Dalinar in earlier books, angry and upset about the fact that shard plate and shard blade were weapons of war.
Right.
Why weren't there
No
shard
shovels.
And why were no wonders of the ancient world focused on helping rather than destroying? I think Syl's line that they were too busy fighting and so they never got to focus on these things is very insightful. That girl really has come a long way from her wispy windspren days.
Intelligent and articulate.
And I do think there is so much more, as I said, when it comes to Honor's truest surge. The fact that surges themselves seem to have a balance between honor and cultivation, and adhesion is way off on one side of the bell curve, seemingly mainly of honor, or maybe just a majority of honor, and it's not accessible to the fused. Adhesion itself is not accessible to any of the fused. That means Kaladin's version of adhesion, but also means the spiritual adhesion that we see more on display from Dalinar. This surge is kind of the one that I want more information on. The sibling calls it the surge of binding and oaths. And all the way back in book 1, Battle of the Tower, Syl says, I've remembered what kind of spren I am. She says, quote, I bind things, Kaladin, she said, turning and meeting his eyes. I am honor spren, spirit of oaths, of promises, and of nobility, end quote. She is honor spren, but the thing that she does is bind. Adhesion is known as the binding surge. It attracts bind spren when performed in mass or in large amounts.
Is adhesion just capital C connection?
Adhesion seems to operate with capital C connection.
But like, are they just the same thing? And this is just a different word that they're using on Rashar? You know, kind of like how surge binding can be used as a general term to talk about any kind of magic wielding because you're just like using the basic powers of the universe. Like, is the thing that's happening actually capital C connection and there's just a different word for it on this planet?
I think it's close to that. We certainly know that Duralumin on Scadrial is used to store connection, and it's the basis of the language medallions that we see in Era 2. We know that Atium, Gold, Malatium, Electrum, all of those things have an aspect of connection that they are manipulating or giving insight to. Mm-hmm. And each of those is like a variation. And I think adhesion is another variation or a play on capital C connection. Kaladin is mainly experiencing it through the physical realm, two physical things being linked to each other. But I don't think that's the end of that power. In fact, we know it's not the end of that power because we know what Dalinar is capable of. And we see Ishar, Big Daddy Herald bondsmith, is capable of incredible things, including connecting a radiant to Rashar and having all of their stormlight drain into the planet itself.
But the things that we see bondsmiths are doing are all connection, capital
Yes.
C connection.
And that is also what Kaladin is
That's why
doing.
I'm saying, is it adhesion? Like, are they just two words for the same thing?
I think adhesion
'Cause it
plays
seems
with
like-
connection, but there are other surges that also play with connection. It's just
Do they?
that, yeah, of course. You have connection
Yeah, I
between
guess
the
like
physical and
Renarin's visions and stuff are using connection.
yeah, but you have Shallan creating illusions. That's connection. She's connected to her drawings of things, her past. You have Yasna, who's able to move into the cognitive realm. That's a connection between the physical. Like, they're all playing with capital C connection. It's just that adhesion is the best tool to play with capital C connection.
I just hate this so much.
You hate what?
I hate the idea. Well, okay. And Rabbaniel also says adhesion is not really a surge.
Correct.
She says all of the surges are some part honor and some part cultivation. So like adhesion is a different thing. I don't like that it doesn't fit and we like don't have an explanation for it yet. And so it just bothers me that it would be so outside of this like hard magic system. We don't have an explanation. And so I don't know why honor would have this other thing that's apparently not a surge that's incorporated into the Hell Bond, but apparently cultivation doesn't have her own thing. I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get it.
But we have seen on display a bunch of time the fractal nature of magic systems and the stories that Brandon is telling. I see this as no different.
But adhesion doesn't fit anywhere in the fractal. That's what I'm saying.
You think it doesn't fit in the fractal,
yes,
but it does fit in the fractal.
Because we don't have the explanation yet.
Right.
And it is absolutely driving me nuts.
It's the shattered plains. You're looking at one of the plateau and you're screaming at yourself, where's the matching plateau? It should be right here, but it shouldn't be right there because they built Narak on that spot. So there is no matching plateau. You want there to be, but the reality of the circumstance is that 10 surges was probably an illusion.
I mean, let's be honest. The reality of the circumstance is that we don't know anything, including you. So,
well, I mean, we know that this is Honor's truest surge. We
also knew that the Voidbringers were the Parshmen, but guess what? That turned out to be not true.
Of course, there's going to be new revelations as we go through the story. There are far more revelations around this concept of a bondsmith, an unchained bondsmith. And the main thing that is unique about those bondsmiths and about Kaladin is this concept of binding. What attracted Syl to Kaladin in the first place? It wasn't him being a great spearman. It was about him forming bonds with others. Despite his difficulty, despite his loss and despair, he formed bonds with his first squad. That's what we think attracted Syl, because it is about forming those spiritual connections between individuals. And that's what Kaladin is doing, seems to want to do, and may be able to do on a far greater thing. He's not going to win by stabbing you with a spear. He's going to win by forming a bond where none seemingly existed before. Maybe that's a bond between the humans and the singers as a people, or as the listeners who we know are hiding off on the far side of the Shattered Plains now. Like, all of these things could be united together, not by Dalinar, but by Kaladin, who has a full understanding of Honor's truest surge, adhesion.
I don't know why that would happen with Kaladin instead of literally the bond smith.
Because I think
it's right in the name, the person who makes bonds.
I agree, but I think that's the red herring. I think Dalinar is going to lose. And
Why?
Because I think there's going to be loss with victory. And so the thing that we are going to lose is Dalinar, and the big war with Odium is going to be a loss. But the thing that we are going to win is that Rashar and maybe a lot of our friends are actually in a peaceful situation led by Kaladin. And that's my hope, because as we've seen with this timeline, Kaladin has just been dealt blow after blow after blow.
Yeah, which is why I'm I don't want him to be a leader. I want him to go be a farmer somewhere and not have to do any more fighting or be responsible for people's lives.
I understand, but he made decisions and he made oaths where he cannot do that any longer.
He can protect people in different ways.
He cannot protect people by being a farmer off by himself. He has to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And if there's a war in the Cosmere, he has to somehow be involved protecting those who cannot protect themselves.
I'm Team Lirin. I think he can protect people by being a surgeon and a mental health practitioner.
I believe there are lots of options for Kaladin going forward. Yeah, I don't think that his story is just moving towards death or despair.
Yeah.
And I am intrigued by the way that he will get there. I feel like there's more than just stabby, big glowy guy is the Superman who's going to save us all. It might be through mental health and becoming, Rashar's first therapist. It might be somehow bonding together multiple disparate groups who disagree with one another.
I have high hopes for what he is going to take away from his interactions with Zeth in this upcoming book. I think that they have a lot in common, but they also have very different experiences. And a lot of times those relationships can really enrich a person and give you a new perspective. So I'm really excited about that. Like you said, I think that Kaladin has a big future. There's a lot of possibilities for him in many different realms. I know a lot of people are either worried about Kaladin dying or they just think that Kaladin is going to die. That is not my opinion at this point. I think that he's going to make it to the end of book 5.
Listener, thank you so much for staying with us. This has been a long episode, and we have more coming your way. We have Dalinar and Shallan each getting their own timeline episode. Let us know what you think about the eventual path that Kaladin is going to go down. Either the one you think is going to happen or the one you want to happen.
Tell us what you think on any of the social media platforms, or you can send us a good old-fashioned email. Of course, you can always join us over on Patreon and hop in the Discord to have conversations about all this stuff.
Please let us know if you are going to be at Dragonsteel, and remember that you can see Brooke and I, 2 different panels there. So hit us up.
Until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.